Economic sanctions against Russia could be backfiring. U.S. companies are warning that profits are falling because of efforts by the West to contain Russia's involvement in Ukraine. Mike Santoli is here to talk more about it. He's senior columnist. So, Mike, the most salient example probably comes from Deere, as in John Deere, the farm equipment maker. So what's going on with them?
So Deere has a couple of factories in Russia. It's a big market for them. The Ukraine specifically, which of course is a big agricultural producing nation, has had a slowdown in capital equipment purchases. So in other words, Deere farm equipment not getting bought in the numbers they expected, in part because credit is not flowing through the Ukraine as they would hope. So it's a general chill related to the sanctions and also related to the tensions over there that Deere is hurt by. AGCO is a big U.S.-based farm equipment competitor to Deere. They're even more exposed, and some analysts have worried about their outlook for sales in that market.
And it's not just farm equipment makers. It goes beyond that to other companies as well, some that are a direct result of sanctions. Visa and MasterCard.
Yeah, probably the most prominent, the card processing companies, Visa and MasterCard. Now, the issue is that big Russian banks, particular Russian banks, are directly come under the sanctions. In other words, you cannot do business with these banks, and Visa and MasterCard have direct links to these banks. That's how they actually process transactions. And they've basically said Visa, I think, has said there's 100 million cardholders in Russia that basically cannot really do business through the Visa network. So that's a big issue for them, and it's actually seemingly prompted a retaliation by the Putin regime, where they've said, well, if you want to do business in Russia later on down the road after July, they have to deposit large amounts of money in Russia to kind of help their processing along. So clearly that's a genuine front in this trade war.
Yeah, and they're a bit of a pawn, and it's interesting because you hear calls from John Boehner to be tougher on the banks. He's encouraging more sanctions, targeting banks directly. We'll see, but in the meanwhile, there are other companies impacted. What are some of the others?
More consumer-related companies that simply have a large business, mostly in Russia. That would be like McDonald's, where they've had to kind of crimp their hours a little bit in the Ukraine, mostly because of the tensions and because general slow customer traffic. And also PepsiCo. You know, Pepsi is actually a huge market share in Russia. They were early, well before Coke getting big in Russia. They have $5 billion in sales all told in Russia. That's like 1/12 of Pepsi's global sales last year. So it's not so much that the sanctions get at it, but Russia economic growth has obviously slowed down. That's been a concern. So it's more about hypothetical vulnerability to that sales base.
Well, so then taking this all in, how material is this really for U.S. companies in perspective?
Yeah.
And looking ahead, as John Kerry on Thursday talked about the possibility of more sanctions if Russia gets involved in Ukraine's May 25th presidential elections. What could be the impact?
I think it's so far pinching around the edges of U.S. business. It's not so much that it's really impacting their overall profit growth, or certainly not economic growth in the broad U.S., but it definitely is something that's a concern for companies that have built a large infrastructure over there or a large business over there. I think energy companies is another area. They obviously have partnerships with some Russian energy producers. All that stuff is creating, I think, a general chill around the area of trade and investment in Russia, which, of course, let's not forget, just a few years ago was considered to be one of the big growth drivers of the emerging world.
Right, which has really changed. And so maybe the chill from the winter weather in the U.S. is now a chill when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine situation impacting business. Mike Santoli, thanks so much.
Yahoo!